Well, this is Up. I'm David Gura, and on this Saturday morning, lawmakers are preparing for a rare day of testimony on the weekend. A deposition from another career diplomat who raised concerns about the administration's Ukraine policy that is scheduled to start in just a few hours. And it's happening as another would-be witness sues to find out if he is obligated to testify. The White House has said he should not be obligated to testify, and a federal judge says the impeachment inquiry is legitimate, and she allows the release of grand jury testimony that underpins the Mueller report. Meanwhile, the GOP struggles to respond. Rudy Giuliani butt dials one of my colleagues here at NBC News, not once, but twice. And as many of the Democrats running for president are in South Carolina today, the Iowa caucuses are now just 100 days away. We have new polling this morning, new insight into how the campaign's calculus is changing 100 days out. And someone who called himself an outsider in President Trump's inner circle will join us. David Shulkin, the former Veterans Affairs Secretary. In a new book, he describes how the president's pals influenced policy from the very beginning. Up with me this morning, Basil Smikle. He's a Democratic strategist. He's the former executive director of the New York Democratic Party. Emily Tisch Sussman was the vice president of campaigns for the Center for American Progress. Now she hosts the podcast Your Primary Playlist, always timely, the latest episode featuring Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger on impeachment. Mike Waldman was the chief speechwriter for President Bill Clinton. Now he is the president of the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University Law School. And joining us this morning from Washington is Annie Carney. She's a White House reporter for the New York Times. And I want to start with NBC News confirming overnight that President Trump's former Deputy National Security Advisor Charles Kupperman has filed a lawsuit asking a judge to decide whether he is required to testify in the ongoing impeachment inquiry. Well, the White House has attempted to block him from testifying, and the outcome of this suit could affect what other would-be witnesses do, including former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who NBC News has reported has been in touch with committee staff on Capitol Hill. Another court case to flag this morning. Republicans have said the impeachment inquiry is not legitimate because it has not been put up for a vote. Well, a federal judge says in a new 75-page ruling that it is legitimate, and that decision was handed down just hours before testimony today from Ambassador Philip Reker. He's a career State Department official who is expected to field questions from lawmakers this morning on Capitol Hill. The GOP continuing to hit Democrats with procedural complaints about how all this is unfolding. The ranking member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Republican Jim Jordan, writing to Ambassador Reker directly to accuse Democrats of restricting information about the impeachment inquiry and asking the ambassador to postpone his deposition because it is taking place on a Saturday. Well, earlier this week, a group of Congressman Jordan's colleagues, many of them with cell phones in hand, stormed a secure facility on Capitol Hill where lawmakers were hearing testimony from a Pentagon official. Andy Carney, let me start with you and this latest news about Charles Kupperman. We've been talking about career officials in the State Department, in the Department of Defense. This is somebody who worked in Trump's inner circle, worked for the National Security Council. He's filed this suit. Help us understand the ramifications of this. He was scheduled to testify, I think, on Monday on Capitol Hill.
That's right. Charles Kupperman, he was basically John Bolton's right-hand man in the West Wing. So he is a critical witness here. He would have been in meetings with Trump and had direct dealings with Bolton and with Trump. And notably, his lawyer is also John Bolton's lawyer. So the fact that his lawyer filed this suit trying to find out, is he part of the executive branch and should follow their orders, or should he follow the orders of the legislative branch who has asked him to come in? The answer will likely be how this lawyer will also deal with John Bolton, who would be a critical voice in this entire impeachment process, who would lead us much closer to direct conversations with President Trump. So the outcome of this will be really interesting and really critical for how the impeachment probe marches forward. But it is also notable that it could, if the judge rules that they should not appear, that it's not just Kupperman we're talking here, it's John Bolton as well.
Let me turn to the gentleman from NYU Law School here at the table. The argument that the president has made is one of constitutional immunity. And in the New York Times today, there's a reference to that as executive privilege on steroids. Help us understand what the White House is wielding here, how novel this is, and what this is likely to hinge on.
This is what the lawyers in a technical term called making stuff up.
Okay, fair enough.
Under pressure. Executive privilege is the idea that there are certain communications from a president to a president that a president can shield from public view. It's only been upheld by the Supreme Court one time in the case of the Watergate tapes, and in that case they said, no, you still have to turn over the tapes. The idea that there is, beyond executive privilege, some other kind of constitutional privilege has never been tested in the courts and has never been defined by the courts. And it really goes to the question of what is an impeachment. When you look back at when they began talking about executive privilege, it was in George Washington's administration when Congress requested some documents. And all the founders, they were writing memos to each other saying, of course, if this were an impeachment, we would have to turn it over. That's in the Constitution. The problem is the courts don't really like to get in the middle of this kind of stuff. They say this is Congress is a co-equal branch to the president. This is its power, but we, the courts, are not necessarily going to be the ones to enforce it for them.
Annie Carney, I'm holding here in my hand these 75 pages from Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. A lot in there, but one thing we want to seize upon here in this conversation is what it says about the legitimacy of this inquiry. And as I said, a lot of Republicans over these last many weeks have said, if the House hasn't voted on this, this is not a legitimate inquiry. How important is this decision? I imagine this is headed for an appeals court.
It's important because the entire Republican argument against it is based on process and not on substance. You have not seen a single Republican lawmaker on Capitol Hill defending what President Trump has done here in terms of the outlined quid pro quo between aid to Ukraine and digging up political dirt on his rivals. So the fact set is really bad for Trump. Republicans know this, and the only argument they have to make is to delegitimize the process that the House Democrats are going through. So if this is declared in the court to be a legitimate probe, that takes away the one big argument that they have been making.
Something else they've been making, an argument they've been making, Emily, Tisch Sussman, is about this happening behind closed doors. We've heard this from Republicans time and time again. Let me read a little bit here from David Graham, who writes for The Atlantic. Thus far, the inquiry has taken place behind closed doors with only opening statements and secondhand accounts of interviews reaching the public. It would be both a miscarriage of justice and political malpractice for Democrats to vote to impeach without public proceedings. The trick is, he continues, that Democrats have said all along they intend to have a public process. He pointing out here the Republicans are making this complaint. It's not happening in public now, but it's going to. We know where this is leading, and that's the public hearing.
It absolutely is going to, and it makes perfect sense that Democrats would try to limit the circus around it to the extent that is possible, which is very low. But it does make sense. They're giving equal time to Democrats and Republicans. They are holding the hearings in a SCIF, a secure location, which is where the Intel Committee gathers testimony. That is normal process. So all of that makes sense. The fact that Republicans stormed in this week to have this big hoopla, I mean, talk about circus. But, it was led by a member who is not on one of the three committees that is involved with the impeachment inquiry. That actually is ridiculous. One of the best comments that I saw looking at that picture of, look, it's almost a quarter of the Republican caucus that is actually in one of these impeachment inquiries, including McCarthy, who's the minority leader. But one of the best comments that I saw is seeing the picture of all of the members storming out is, what is this, an abortion hearing? When we looked at the picture of all the white men storming out in all their indignity.
Standing outside that building.